Jake's POV. Around me, all that could be heard was the scribbling of pencils filling in multiple-choice bubbles. I wasn't too stressed about the test since the engineering course I wanted to enter wasn't particularly hard to get into, and I happened to be pretty decent at math. The class was 10 minutes into the mid-year math exam when, under me, a brightly illuminated circle patterned with lines and smaller circles appeared. Startled, I looked up, but no one seemed to notice. That's when everything went dark. Like a slow blink, the world came back into view again, except my view was full of little royal blue-colored and almost sparkling bird nymphs staring up at me. I staggered back in surprise before I managed to regain my balance and look around the room. The roof was just above my head, but since these little nymph things were what this room was designed for, I guess it made sense. To them, it probably looked more like an arena or a school gym. In fact, there were definitely some kind of gymnastics bars and other assorted climbable bars scattered around the room. Turning my attention back to the nymphs, I noticed a couple among them seemed to be a little larger and duller colored, like a steel blue, and decorated in gold lace that definitely made them look more official. There was one standing in front of a crowd of what seemed to me to be younger nymphs. They were almost holding them back behind a kind of invisible line, while behind the crowd stood 3 taller ones, who definitely looked apprehensive. My attention finally rested on one bright blue bird nymph facing me and standing in front of all the others. It looked like it was fidgeting, peering up at me with upturned eyes. It chirped, and as it did, I felt encouragement, demand, and I should tell them who I am. I guess they wouldn't know, I thought to myself. "Hey, I'm Jake," I said to the large crowd while waving my hand. The group of brightly colored nymphs exploded in a cacophony of shushed chirps. Their chirps and tweets strongly reminded me of the excited whispering when someone does something amazing in a library or some situation where you need to be quiet. The 4 who I was starting to suspect were teachers seemed to relax a little. Their feathers flattened closer to their bodies, but their gazes stayed wary. The little light blue one at the front seemed to gain a bit of confidence, holding its head higher and walking with a longer stride. It chirped once again, but this time I felt authority, submission, and I should go to my master. Wait, master? I thought, seemingly at odds with my own mind. I cannot keep her waiting. What? Why can't I keep who waiting? In my mind, the back and forth raged. I would flip between desperation and a desire to serve, to confusion and clarity. No, I just have to walk to her. What the frick? Why am I thinking this? Go to her. Holy crap, is this mind control? Go to her now! Get out of my head! I screamed, filled with frustration and unbridled rage. As I yelled, the crowd of birds shrank away, falling completely silent. Even the 4 teachers looked stunned, but they quickly recovered. In the silence, the light blue one nervously repeated her chirp. I should... Good work, 13, my instructor told me, as I made the enormous creature fall under the right of dominance. If you keep up at this pace, you will be a capable healing mage in no time. Thank you, sir, I told him. Now take your new familiar and go join the rest of the class while 14 takes his turn, he told me. I led this new beast to the back, and we took our place in line. We sat through a few more neems summoning their own familiars, some of which were quite impressive, before our teacher moved on to the next part of the lesson. Okay, everyone, if you will all follow me, we are going to travel to the Grand Temple to perform your binding rituals to your new familiars. The school has made reservations, and they are preparing for us now, but let's try not to waste time. They have many others who need to bond with their familiars as well. Once his announcement was finished, we were instructed to wrap our familiars in mana and carry them to the temple while we flew. All of the summoned familiars were larger than us, but only myself and 3 others had any difficulty, as our familiars were abnormally large. Even still, the flight to the temple was exciting. The thought of having my own familiar exhilarated me. Upon arriving at the temple, we dropped off our familiars in a handling area and were greeted by a nun, I knew because she had completely dyed her feathers white, who explained how the ritual worked and what we should expect from it. Has everyone already performed the rite of dominance on their chosen familiars? She asked the instructor. Yes, we were able to have everyone do it before our departure from the academy, he told her. Good, we expected you would, but better safe than sorry. She turned to the class. Now, I am assuming this is the first time any of you have performed this ritual outside of practicing it at school, am I correct? Yes, madam, we all replied. We were told that was the proper way to respond and address a nun of the temple. Well then, would you all like to watch a pairing before you actually perform one for yourselves? We have several that will be occurring soon, and I'm sure one of them wouldn't mind, she offered. We all happily agreed, and the nun left to check if any of the participants would mind an audience. Our little waiting room was filled with the elated whispers of my class discussing any number of things. I heard 4 separate conversations about what it would be like to have a familiar of their own, 2 conversations about how powerful their summons looked, and at least 2 males in the back discussing how attractive the nun was. After a short wait, the nun returned. Good news, children. One man has agreed to allow you to watch his pairing ritual. She led us to one of the chambers where the rituals take place, and inside was an adult neem, several armed guards, and the familiar, a drake. Hello, everyone. I am Magistrate Gakil. I hear you would like to observe my pairing today. He laughed a little. Well, I am more than happy to help educate our future minds and mages. After a short wait, the nun returned. Good news, children. Someone has agreed to allow you to watch his pairing ritual. She led us to one of the chambers where the rituals take place, and inside was an adult neem, several armed guards, and the familiar, a drake. Hello, everyone. I am Magistrate Gakil. I hear you would like to observe my pairing today. He laughed a little. Well, I am more than happy to help educate our future minds and mages. Our teacher walked up to the noble. Thank you, Magistrate Gakil, for allowing my students to watch your pairing ritual. Do you mind if I ask which technique you will be using today? Oh, of course. Actually, I am using a more abnormal bonding ritual than I have with my other familiars. Since this drake is such a rare familiar, I am going to use a naming-type pairing, the noble explained. A naming type? Our teacher asked, flummoxed. I couldn't blame him. Naming-type pairings were mostly reserved for high-quality magical items or the familiars of royals. It is unusual for anyone to use it on a familiar. Not to say that many familiars aren't named, assuming the summoner has the magical power for it anyway, but most are given names after the pairing ritual as a way of increasing the familiar's abilities. Well, I suppose it is a drake, my teacher reasoned. At that moment, a priest landed beside the magistrate and alerted him that everything was prepared. Ah, thank you, he said to the priest. He then turned and dressed us. Now, children, we are about to release the drake. While I do have him under mental domination, I think it's better if you stay back. It is a rather large beast, and I wouldn't want anyone getting caught underfoot. We all acknowledged his instructions and cleared the area for the drake. My classmates and I excitedly watched the ritual from the corner of the room opposite the drake. The ritual began with the magistrate casting a magic circle around both him and the creature he wished to pair with. Then, an exchange of power began, which was finished once the circles changed color. After that, all that was left to do was give the creature a name, which would mark it as property of the magistrate. I name you, egos. I watched the whole event in fascination, but once the newly minted egos stood up, and the circles at their feet vanished, I knew it was over. An excellent show, Magistrate Gakil. Thank you for allowing the children to watch. I truly believe this was a great opportunity, our guide, the nun, said to him. It was my pleasure, madam. I hope you children were watching closely because you may need to repeat it in your bonding rituals, he stated. Students, let's all thank the magistrate for allowing us this opportunity. Thank you, sir, we all said together. The magistrate then wished us the best of luck, and our group was led by our instructor and the nun to our chamber in which our class would be performing the rituals. Number 1, the nun called out as his summon was brought into the chamber. One by one, each of us completed the pairing, until finally it was my turn. I was number 13, and there were only 3 people behind me. So even after I finished, I would still need to stand to the side with my familiar while the rest finished their rituals. Number 13, the nun called out, and my summon was let out. However, something was odd. He was the only one that was chained up. There were iron bindings around his hands and neck. Why has he been chained? I asked. Suddenly, an overwhelming sense of relief came over me. but it wasn't my relief. It was his. "Just in case," the nun said warily. "Sir," I called out to my teacher, "is feeling the emotions of your familiar normal? You already performed the rite of dominance on him, so some residual emotions making their way to you is a good sign. It means your bond is strong." He explained. I took this as a good sign and proceeded with the ritual. Just like I had been practicing, I started by forming a magic circle around our feet. But something was wrong. In practice and in the rituals of all the other students, the circle formed around the familiar was a single color, but this one possessed multiple colors. Then the summon dropped to the ground and flames started to encircle him. "A name is required!" a voice like thunder demanded, but where it came from I couldn't tell. Suddenly the flames began to morph and take shape into something else entirely. At first it looked similar to my familiar, but it kept changing into something else, something more like a salamander or a drake. "A name is required!" it boomed again. I had no idea what was happening, and my classmates were now all cowering behind the nun and our teacher, as well as their familiars. "A name?" I asked the voice, which I believed to have come from that figure of flame. "A name is required!" he bellowed again. I thought for a moment. I hadn't planned on using a naming bond, but if I had to give it a name— "Ulok!" I shouted at the figure, and in doing so, gave the summon a name. "Ah!" Ulok cried out, sounding in pain. A magic circle had embedded itself onto his body. I knew that would happen, but I didn't expect it to hurt him. With that, the figure made of flames vanished into smoke, and the room was left with nothing but a deafening silence. "A name is required!" a voice like thunder demanded, but where it came from I couldn't tell. Suddenly, the flames began to morph and take shape into something else entirely. At first it looked similar to my familiar, but it kept changing into something else, something more like a salamander or a drake. "A name is required!" it boomed again. I had no idea what was happening, and my classmates were now all cowering behind the nun and our teacher, as well as their familiars. "A name?" I asked the voice, which I believed to have come from that figure of flame. "A name is required!" he bellowed again. I thought for a moment. I hadn't planned on using a naming bond, but if I had to give it a name— "Ulok!" I shouted at the figure, and in doing so, gave the summon a name. "Ah!" Ulok cried out, sounding in pain. A magic circle had embedded itself onto his body. I knew that would happen, but I didn't expect it to hurt him. With that, the figure made of flames vanished into smoke, and the room was left with nothing but a deafening silence. What was that?" A scared student hiding behind their familiar cried out, shattering the quiet. The nun who had been watching us was in what I think was a prayer position, but I couldn't tell if she was praying for protection or something else entirely. I could see some of the others whispering to themselves, probably wondering the same things I was. Eventually, our instructor snapped himself out of it. "Okay, everyone, we are going to take a break for a moment. Everyone who has already completed the ritual may go home, and any who haven't but do not wish to stay may also go home." He announced, and almost everyone left, save a few who seemed determined to bond to their summons no matter what. They waited with a guard, one of the few who hadn't fled, until they would be allowed to continue their rituals. Then the teacher and the nun, who had pulled herself together as well, flew over to me. "Child, what was that? What kind of pairing ritual did you use?" the nun questioned. I don't know," I said, confused. "You must have done something," the teacher reasoned. "The magic circle was glowing multiple colors. That doesn't just happen." "What kind of impurity have you brought into this temple girl?" the nun accused. I don't," I tried to say, but got overwhelmed. Just then, that same sense of protection washed over me again, and before I knew what was happening, I was scooped up by Ulok and was being placed onto his shoulder by him. However, I hadn't ordered him to do that. "What are you doing, child?" the nun asked. "This is a complete overreaction to being questioned." "I didn't tell him to do this," I explained. "He just did it on his own." "Well, tell him to stop," the teacher suggested. "Put me down," I ordered. Ulok looked over at me with what I think was worry, but did as he was told and sat me down gently. "Good," I said. "Well, at least you have control over him," the nun remarked in a snide tone. "I'm sorry, madam," But I truly don't know what that flaming creature was, I told her. She seemed to relent and accepted that I was telling the truth. They asked me question after question, and I answered as many as I could, but that doesn't mean I answered very many. Until finally my teacher saw the faces of the few students who had stayed behind to finish their rituals. "Okay," my teacher interrupted. "We can finish this later. Right now, these students need to take priority. 13. Will you please go wait in the corner until they are finished? We can resume this in a while." I did as I was told and flew to perch on Ulok's body, then he walked us over to where I directed him. Riding on him was odd. His movements are slow and lumbering at first glance, but after experiencing them firsthand, I realized how fluidic they actually were. Even the gentle side-to-side swaying he has just when standing still is so slow and gentle that I didn't even notice it at first. Turning my attention back to the rituals, I watched as the last of the students bonded with their summons, turning them into familiars. Each of the familiars was so different than mine, theirs seemed so bestial, whereas Ulok seemed more refined. "Okay, boy," the final student said upon completing the ritual. "Let's go home and show Mom." It was then I realized I had no idea what gender my familiar was. I had just assumed Ulok was a boy because of how big he was, but I didn't know for sure. Why haven't I stopped myself halfway through my thought. I knew why I couldn't tell Ulok's gender. It was because Ulok was wearing garments. But why would you be wearing garments? Did you have another owner before I summoned you? Is it natural for your species to drape things over themselves? I wondered aloud. I got a sense that Ulok was confused, that he perhaps didn't understand. And why would he? Familiars typically only understand simple commands, not questions or sentences. Yes, I suppose you wouldn't understand. If you did, I could just ask you if you were male or female. I wasn't worried about talking to Ulok. People talk to their familiars all the time. It's treated mostly like just thinking aloud, however most familiars don't talk back. I'm a guy. Why haven't I stopped myself halfway through my thought. I knew why I couldn't tell Ulok's gender. It was because Ulok was wearing garments. But why would you be wearing garments? Did you have another owner before I summoned you? Is it natural for your species to drape things over themselves? I wondered aloud. I got a sense that Ulok was confused, that he perhaps didn't understand. And why would he? Familiars typically only understand simple commands, not questions or sentences. Yes, I suppose you wouldn't understand. If you did, I could just ask you if you were male or female. I wasn't worried about talking to Ulok. People talk to their familiars all the time. It's treated mostly like just thinking aloud. However, most familiars don't talk back. I'm a guy, Ulok said. I was stunned. You can speak? I blurted out. Yes, ma'am, is that surprising? He asked, to my absolute shock and awe. I've never heard of a familiar speaking before, I told him. If it pleases you, ma'am, I can remain quiet, he said. No, it's fine, I was just surprised, I said, not wanting him to be offended. Then it hit me. I had an intelligent being under my mental domination. Are you okay? I'm fine. There was a short pause. But I do have a question, if you would allow me. Of course. I didn't know how to react, how to think. I was still processing the realization of the situation, so until I decided what to do, I would go about as normal. What is your name, my lady? He wondered. Oh, I don't possess a name. He looked shocked, almost offended. I don't know how I could tell considering we were different species. Perhaps it was a side effect of the dominance right? You don't have a name, may I ask why? I was never given one. My parents didn't possess the magical prowess necessary to name me, like most parents in my country, I explained. He was silent for a few moments, seemingly in thought. Would you allow me to name you? He requested. What? I stuttered. I would be honored to give you a name, he declared proudly. You want to name me? If you wish me to, he offered. Your offer is enticing, but my world has laws for naming. Although I have heard rumors that the one first in line for the position of Grand Duke has plans to relax some of those laws, as well as intensify others. Right now, those current rules must be followed, at least until the new Grand Duke is decided. I explained. He seemed disappointed, but agreed to wait and drop the issue until then. Soon the last of the students finished their pairing rituals and we were dismissed, but I was asked to be sure to make myself available for later questioning. I needed to be alone for a while, so I sent Ulok home. I wanted to have a conversation with my parents about what happened today at the ritual, and to discuss Ulok himself. When I arrived and opened the entrance to our home, I was surprised to see that several temple officials, a nun and a priest, were already talking with my parents. Soon, the last of the students finished their pairing rituals and we were dismissed, but I was asked to be sure to make myself available for later questioning. I needed to be alone for a while, so I sent Ulok home. I wanted to have a conversation with my parents about what happened today at the ritual, and to discuss Ulok himself. When I arrived and opened the entrance to our home, I was surprised to see that several temple officials, a nun and a priest, were already talking with my parents. "Daughter, there you are! These nice mages from the citadel wish to have a word with you," my mother said. She flew over to me and whispered very intensely, "What did you do? Why are nobles and clergy looking for you?" I do not know how to explain it," I whispered back. "Are you the young girl who summoned the fire spirit?" the priest asked. "I do not think it was a spirit," I said. "Then you know what it was?" The nun, who was perched in the corner of the room, asked. "No, I do not." "What is this fire spirit that you believe my daughter summoned?" my father interrupted. "The nuns witnessed it with their own eyes. Your daughter summoned some kind of fire spirit during her pairing ritual," the priest said. "My daughter does not have the power to do something like that. She has not even finished her tenure at the academy." My father's words hurt, but they were true. As far as I knew, I could not have been the one that summoned that creature. Ulok was my familiar now, but it would be another few hours, maybe even a day before I would know how powerful he was. It usually takes somewhere between 5 and 19 hours for the rituals to finish bonding our souls, and for me to know his magical attribute and strength. My husband is correct. My daughter couldn't possibly have summoned any spirit. And yet one showed up, demanding that your daughter name her familiar, the priest said. "Why don't you summon your familiar now, so we can examine it?" the nun suggested. I do not know if that would be a good idea," I said. "Just do it so they can see that they are wrong and will leave," my father said. I looked around the room and my parents and the clergy, and then at the room itself. Ulok was much too tall to fit comfortably in here. "He is too large, we would need to go outside in order to do it," I said, still not truly sure what to do. "Fine then. Let us go outside so we may see the familiar with our own eyes," the priest said. We all flew to the base of the mountain. They perched on a mountain, and I landed on the ground. "I summon you, Ulok," I said, and cast the summoning spell. Slowly he appeared in front of us, although he looked different from before. Despite only an hour having passed, he was now dressed in different garments. With his new garments on, the magic circle that formed on his arm was clearly showing, and shined dimly until he fully appeared. He looked around confused for a moment, then he saw me and lowered himself before me. Through my control ritual, I felt that this was his way of showing reverence to me. It was his species version of a bow. "I'm sorry, my lady, if I'd known you'd need me tonight, I wouldn't have changed into my pajamas," Ulok said. I looked back at my family and the clergy and saw exactly what I expected to see, horror and surprise. "You're familiar. It spoke," my mother said. "Yes, it was quite a shock to me as well," I said. "This is nearly unheard of," the nun said. "What manner of monster have you gained, child?" the priest asked, stunned. "My lady, shall I kill them?" Ulok asked. I could feel his anger at the priest's comment. No, they are members of the clergy. You cannot kill them," I ordered. "Yes, my lady," he said, and lowered his head. How is this possible?" my father asked. "Love," my mother asked me, "what is this creature?" "Do you want me to introduce myself, my lady?" Ulok offered. "Yes, that might be a good idea," I said. "I am Ulok, a human from the planet Earth, born in the country of England 17 years ago." After that, he stayed quiet for several moments. "Is that it?" the nun asked expectantly. "Yep," Ulok said. "Well, what about your magical attribute or your family lineage or your titles?" my mother asked. I expected the priest to be more vocal during this, but he was staying only quiet and looking very intensely at Ulok. He was clearly frightened. "My name is Ulok, but it used to be Jake Vandal. My lady changed it once she officially put me under her service. As for magic, I don't have any, no titles either." "Does that mean that you were able to rename this creature?" the nun asked. "What do you mean, no magic?" my father asked. Actually, it had not yet set in, but Ulok did say that. I simply had not realized it yet. Until I met my lady, I didn't even know magic was real. I just assumed it was a myth. When Ulok said that, I knew he was wrong. "You are mistaken," I said. "While the ritual has not yet fully bonded us, it has progressed enough that I can feel some of your magic, although I still cannot tell what type it is." "I have magic?" Ulok sounded surprised. "We need to go," the priest stated suddenly. He was glaring at Ulok as if he hated him. "But the nun tried to say. "We are leaving!" the priest yelled, and flew into the sky, towards the grand sanctum. The nun followed quickly after. That night, my parents asked me quite a lot of questions, and even more to Ulok. I had to skip my attendance at the academy the next day, due to not getting any sleep. Ulok was also tired, but said he would stay awake for as long as I needed him to. I ordered him to get some rest and sent him home. When I woke up, I chose to check the progress of the rituals and found that it had fully bonded us. I took a moment to sense Ulok's magical attribute. I could feel it as clearly as if it were my own, and the realization left me horrified. "Ulok has chaos magic," I whispered. After talking it over with my parents and the priests, we all decided that having a familiar with chaos magic is too dangerous. Since I have body magic, any time that Ulok and I used our combination magic, it would become some form of death magic. That thought frightened me. The priests contacted a noble who agreed to take Ulok as his own familiar, meaning I needed to learn a rite to sever our familiar's bond and my right of dominance over him. Ulok was upset and claimed he wanted to serve only me, but I forbid him from bringing it up again, and he has not since. Now myself, 3 high-class mages, the Nobel, whose name was Zalpak, a priest, a nun, and my parents were all in the summoning room, preparing to end my bond with Ulok so that Zalpak could take him for his own. I think the priest only came in case that strange, flaming figure reappeared. First, we must remove the right of dominance, since it was applied before Ulok became your familiar. It is the oldest magical bond you have with him, and it is acting as the foundation of your bond. The noble explained. But that is a rather dangerous thing, so we will have him go into a cage first, and we have these 3 mages here as well, for safety's sake. I understand, I said. Ulok, go wait in the cage, I said. Ulok said nothing, but his head hung low, and I could feel his sadness through our link. The doors to the wooden cage were closed and locked with bars of metal. Not even a Borog beast would be able to escape from it. After a short preparation period, everyone was ready, and I began the rite. A magic circle formed around Ulok, the same one that was on his arm. It shifted colors from blue to purple to red. Soon, cracks began to form in the magic circle, and Ulok began to scream while holding his head. "It is hurting him?" I asked. "Focus on the rite. It must be performed correctly. The pain will subside soon," the noble said. A few moments more passed, and the circle was filled with countless cracks, until it finally shattered, and I felt my control over Ulok's mind vanish. The first stage of the rite was completed, so now it was time for me to sever our familiar's bond. But before I did, Ulok did what all familiars do when they lose their masters. He rampaged. "Ha!" he cried out, and threw himself over and over again into the cage door with so much fury and force that the metal bars began to bend. This lasted so long that I feared the cage may not withstand it, and he would escape. But after several minutes, Ulok quieted down and sat down in the cage, looking all around the room. The intelligence that had once resided behind his eyes and had shaken me to my bones no longer resided within him. All that was left was the madness that comes with a familiar losing its master. With Ulok calm, I gathered my strength and began the second half of the rite. This time, rather than a new magic circle forming, the one on Ulok's shoulder began to glow. Just as before, cracks formed along and inside of it until it too shattered. Now, I felt my connection to Ulok sever entirely, except for the summoning power that I still held over him. That would not be relinquished until Ulok gained his new master. "Excellent job, young one," the noble said, and flew closer to Ulok's cage. Inside, Ulok sat just where he had been for the last several minutes, closely examining his shoulder. "Yes, this has all been a fine showing." The noble asked the priest excitedly, "Did you see how powerful this one is? It nearly broke the cage all on its own. Splendid, truly splendid." Before the noble could finish his thought, Ulok, who had been ignoring us until now, suddenly launched himself once more at the cage door. Without warning, the door broke, and Ulok was free. With a single powerful strike and a feather-curling howl, Ulok knocked Zalpak out of the air to the ground. Picking him up, he then proceeded to horrifically and mercilessly slam Zalpak into the ground over and over again until his head was little more than a smear on the ground. My parents, myself, and the priest, all shocked, started to fly away. While all this happened, the high-class mages pelted Ulok with spell after spell, but he barely seemed to care. "Kill it! Kill it! Kill it!" someone shouted as those of us desperately trying to escape searched for an exit. "Magic isn't working! Who summoned it? Send it back!" another person yelled. "Send it back!" my mother yelled at me. I dove to the ground and faced Ulok, who had begun to eat the body of the noble while the mages attacked him. Parts of Ulok's body were burning, falling off, twisted in unnatural directions, or were impaled with wooden stakes from spells, but nothing caused him to look away from his meal. What was left of his face was covered in both his and Zalpak's blood. As soon as I landed, I reversed the summons, sending Ulok away. Unfortunately, since he was holding the noble, Zalpak disappeared as well. For far too long, not a single sound was heard, except for everyone's heavy breathing and my mother's sobs. But I doubt anyone noticed those. "Who's going to tell his son?" one of the three high-class mages asked one of the others. "I have never seen a familiar transfer go like this." What are we supposed to do now?" the priest asked, though I think he was simply thinking aloud. "I do not know," one of the mages replied. "I do," a voice said, and Ulok's mangled figure slowly reappeared. "By the dragons," the priest said. "Exactly," Ulok said, except it did not sound like Ulok. Not really. A sickening feeling filled the room as Ulok activated a spell. His magic felt different, putrid. His torn flesh and twisted limbs pulled itself back together, and what body parts he had lost regrew after mere moments. "Which of you was the master of this body?" it asked. "Kill it!" one of the mages shouted and began casting spells. All of their spells connected, and did in fact damage his body, but the damage was healed almost immediately, as if it never happened. "So probably not you three," it said, and waved its hand. That thing, whatever it was, cast a spell. Rot! Without warning, the mages all began to die, their bodies turning black, and their feathers falling away. "I'll ask again, which of you was this one's master?" I was," I answered, scared and on the verge of singing. It looked at me with a disgusting gaze like it had found something new to hunt. "Good. Firstly, I'd like to thank you." "What? Why?" I asked, trembling. "Because you killed that stubborn personality, the one that was inside this body's head before. You did it twice, actually. Thank you. You made taking over it so much easier," it said. "What? Who are you? What do you want?" my mother asked, placing herself between this monster and me. "Ah, right. I didn't introduce myself. My name is Dea, and I'm going to kill you all. But please, allow me to reward you. As thanks, I'll let you have a completely painless death. I'll even kill you last if you want. Or first, I'll let you choose." Deja's POV. "Ah, revenge. The longer it takes, the better it feels when it's finally done," I said, standing atop a mountain's peak, looking over the burning remains of the last city stronghold on Atmeria, or Atmosia, as they called it now. After finally freeing myself from the ether realm and properly thanking those who helped me escape, I got back to work with what I'd started before I was sealed away, destroying everything that my clan's Ashem had wasted centuries building up. But I didn't have much time to savor my accomplishments because I needed to leave this world and find my clan. This new body of mine is almost as powerful as my original, and it has negative ether as well, though it is naturally attuned to a different type. Actually, I think it is closer to what my old friend Zachariah had. If that isn't fate, what is? With my new body, I should be able to finally take what I'm owed. Let's see, according to that queen, it has been about 1,000 years since I left. My son should be rather old now. He shouldn't pose much trouble, I said, casting a spell to open a door to another world. Right now, the only one on this world was sealed years ago and used against me. So I need to go to another world and find a portal that isn't contaminated or sealed. This body has an original world, so I'll start there, I said, and stepped through the portal. I thought for a moment about going and freeing Zachariah from that trap he made for me, but I think he's probably dead by now. Without two there to keep each other alive, nothing could survive there for more than a few hours, and I've been free for weeks. Stepping through the portal was just as I remembered. There was a rush of power that refreshed my mana and body as I briefly crossed through the ether realm, and then I opened my eyes to see a new world. So this is the world Zachariah is from? Bit dark, I said, but then immediately noticed the overwhelming mana surrounding me. It felt like it could crush me if I was not careful. I allowed it to flow through me freely, but immediately regretted it as a wave of pain followed. Ah, too bad. This body isn't compatible with this world's mana anymore. Must have happened when it became a familiar. Oh well, it will do for now. I looked around, trying to discern where I was. There was no clear access to the sky, and it was also obviously a dwelling of some kind. Light suddenly filled the room, causing a mind pain in my new eyes. "Welcome, you must be Deja," a voice behind me said, surprising me. "What? You know me?" I asked, shocked, and prepared myself for a fight. Turning around, I saw two Virkings, a little older than this new body I was in, and probably the same sex, but it was hard to tell with their garments on. One wore blue, and the other was covered in metal, and had one of Zachariah's words in hand. It was the first thing to catch my eye for several reasons. It was clearly empowered with strange magic, something I did not recognize at first. However, I realized quickly that it was neutral ether, meaning it was being directly powered by the ether realm itself. The next thing to catch my attention was the overwhelmingly powerful magic stone the one in blue garments was holding. I shuddered to think of the kind of power one must have had to create it. "We have a mutual friend, your son, Hashem. A few weeks ago he said you escaped, and that you were probably going to come after him, so we took a few precautions," the one in blue garments said. "Hashem! I look forward to seeing him again," I shouted and launched an attack. Or I tried to. The mana here was overwhelming, and with this body being incompatible, the spell failed. Or rather, it was crushed by this world's mana as soon as I cast it. Merlin, wasn't this guy supposed to be really powerful? Like, end-of-the-world powerful? His spells don't even work, the one wearing metal garments said, mockingly. His magic doesn't feel right. It doesn't feel like any mana I've encountered before. I'd love to study it a bit more, but he's too big of a risk. Looks like he's a body hopper like Morgan, too, so we'd better take care of him quick. Excalibur's spirit magic should be enough. The one in the blue garments said, "You can't! No! No! After all this time! You can't just—" I yelled, but faster than I could see, the magic sword pierced my chest. I tried to cast healing magic on it, but the spell was crushed. Over and over I tried, but each spell failed. The pain. I'd felt it before, but this time, it was like I was being eaten alive as the neutral ether coursed through me. My legs gave out and I fell down, the sword pulling out of me as I did. "What do we do with the body, Merlin?" the metal one asked. "It probably had a family. Let's try and track them down. Let them know what happened to their son. For now, I'll store it in the vault, just in case. The library is already sealed, so the soul can't escape anyway. It should be fine for now. Nice work, Arthur. I'll let Hashem know what happened later," the blue one said. As my vision blurred, I felt cold and angry until everything faded away. If you love engaging stories like this, make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications to stay updated with all the latest episodes from FY Stories.